we now have a panel discussion around DeFi maturity and adoption. So it's my pleasure to introduce both Michael Nadeau from Invenium and also Professor Dr. Isabell Welpe from the Technical University of Munich. I'm hoping you're both there. Hi, guys.
Hi, Ryan.
Hi.
Good to be here.
Hi, Ryan.
Hi, good to see you both. Wonderful. I have a great long summary of all of the wonderful, amazing things you guys are doing in the space, but maybe it's easier if I get you to introduce yourselves and just tell us a little bit about what you're working on. So, Dr. Isabell, well, perhaps you can give us a quick intro in terms of what brought you into this exciting world.
Sure, thank you. So I have a chair of strategy at the Munich University of Technology, and we do research on emerging technologies and how they disrupting established business models. And so my problem and talent probably is we are always a bit early in the research that we do, which is great on the one hand, because you get to meet interesting people who, you know, are path breakers. But if you're applying for grants from traditional research institutions, it's a bit of a problem. And as is, you know, I've been sort of working with some fellow research on trying to engage German and continental European financial institutions, telling them, look, you know, this wave is coming, Web3 and DeFi, and you need to act now to set standards. But, you know, either I don't know how to do it right, or it's just very, very difficult to get them to adopt these trends early on. So that's, you ask what I'm doing most of the time, that's what I'm doing.
So it sounds like you and Ian Taylor should definitely have a conversation about strategies on that approach, and so some easy models to be able to explain.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, we talked a bit, so I think it's further ahead in the UK than it is here.
Okay. Wow, it doesn't feel like that sometimes, but that's good to know. That's good to know. Maybe that's the British pessimist in me. Wonderful. Michael Nadeau, our super sub, came in at short notice. Thank you so much for joining us and coming into the panel. Perhaps if you could, you know, give a few words about what you're working on, that'd be brilliant.
Sure. Yeah, happy to be here and happy to jump in last minute. So I'm the director of ecosystem strategy at Invenium. So Invenium's in the business of leveraging blockchain and artificial intelligence to help bring price discovery and valuation to private market assets, which really increases the liquidity profile of those assets. And so we're seeing a lot of kind of adoption coming into really kind of the security token market, and I can speak a little bit about kind of how that ecosystem is forming a little bit today. I also write an educational newsletter that covers the decentralized finance space. So we talk about everything from Bitcoin to Ethereum and some of the other interesting layer one projects and all the interesting applications that are being brought to market on top of some of those layer one blockchains. And then I just recently joined the Blockchain Chamber of Commerce on their advisory board, which was kind of how I was invited to come speak today. So happy to be here.
Wonderful. Yeah, there does seem to be a bit of a theme, a guild almost of Chamber of Commerce people today. So that's great. Some very insightful, well-informed chaps there. So that's excellent. So, I mean, just to give kind of a broad overview, obviously, you know, what we're here to talk to is sort of around the DeFi maturity and adoption. I think it's fair to say it is cataclysmic how quickly this whole market has moved in just a year and a half. I mean, I think it's probably aged me 5 trying to track it for the last 18 months or so. And we've, you know, gone from a kind of an area where we saw an explosion in assets under management, a lot of incentive type pools on a protocol level, to now where we're seeing perhaps a maturation in terms of not only the instruments themselves, in terms of how they operate, but maybe in terms of the people who are starting to access these protocols as well, moving away from, let's call them the shadowy supercoders of DeFi, more to more centralized parties, and even, and I can say this knowing that we have certain clients, some institutions who are actually starting to look and access these protocols. So perhaps, Dr. Welpe, maybe you can give us a little bit of an oversight in terms of, you know, how we might see this sort of space further mature coming into 2022.
Yeah. So I like, the several people doing comparisons on the development of Web 2 and comparing it to where we are with Web 3. And regardless of which metric you use, whether it's total global internet users, crypto users, or Bitcoin wallet holders, most agree that we're around the year 1998. Now, I don't know about you, but I was introduced to the internet. I was, on the World Economic Forum, and someone showed the delegation group the internet at a gas station, and it was a terminal with one search line, and that search line was Yahoo, because Google had not yet been invented. And we politely asked the technician who was there to show us the internet, we asked, what can you do with it? And he said, you can search. And we were not very impressed, so we politely asked, what can you search? And he said, well, you can search for anything. And I distinctively remember that feeling, that we thought, this is nice, but who needs that in 1998? So if that's where we are today, and I actually believe that the development will be faster in Web 3 than it was in Web 2 for several reasons, then it really is time to act now for institutions, for people who want to set standards, because there will be standards set again in this new cycle of technology, moving away from centralized services to decentralized services. And we will see one day or the other breakthrough applications, as we saw with Internet 2, the Netscape browser surface that made it super easy, super convenient to navigate and search the internet. We're not there yet, for sure, we're not there yet, but my guess it will be happening. And another big barrier, I guess, is anything related to legal questions. So personally, I feel next to the convenient surfaces that are lacking for the average user, who doesn't want to handle several private public keys. The second thing that's holding adoption back, I think, are the unresolved legal issues or the uncertainties. Can I actually go and set up a decentralized autonomous organization? What do I really own if I own an NFT? Will it hold up in court? Things like that. But once these two are addressed, I think it's going to be a straight up line of adoption.
No, certainly a few big moving factors, and I think we've even seen some centralized parties really start to move in that direction as well in terms of self-hosted wallets. I mean, we saw, just the other day, Coinbase acquire BRD. The sort of the earliest wallets which encrypted your keys onto the mobile app itself. In a very user-friendly way, something that really felt like a neobank app almost from 2018 onwards.
Yeah. If you compare, and I'm trying to look this up, if you compare Coinbase though to Uniswap, and Uniswap is a DAO, right? I think it's very interesting because they have received much less funding. Uniswap, they have far fewer employees, and yet they have I think a comparable amount of money that they manage. So I have the numbers here. So Uniswap was founded in 2018, Coinbase in 2012. The total funding of Uniswap is $12 million, and Coinbase had $550 million. And they have a similar market cap. So it's 24 billion for Uniswap and 54. So you see sort of that even these new founded crypto companies, but the centralized crypto companies are being disrupted by newcomers with new organizational forms.
Absolutely. And Michael, perhaps you'd like to weigh in there. What do you see as one of the sort of the larger drivers within how the kind of the DeFi space might mature over the next year, or even 3 months? We probably need to look at this on a month by 3 month basis by the speed of innovation we're seeing.
It's happening very fast, and I would echo a lot of what Professor Welpe is alluding to there, with just kind of the explosion of growth. I think what's super interesting about these networks is that they are all kind of owned and governed by the users themselves, right? So this is a really kind of different model from kind of the information networks from the Web 2.0 framework, where we have as users we have access to maybe a free social network or a free search engine, but there's no economic participation from the general public with these networks. So this is really kind of a very disruptive model that we're introducing. And I think what's interesting is that some of this viral growth is happening without really any organized marketing efforts from these protocols and these networks as well. And I think that kind of comes back to what I'm alluding to, where everybody wants to talk about the new products or services that they're using. But when you're also economically incentivized to do that, there's this kind of viral loop around that. And I think what Professor Welpe alluded to with something like a Uniswap, a lot of these networks are in protocols in DeFi. They're leveraging this base layer blockchain ecosystem, for example, Ethereum. And so they're able to outsource their capital costs and their operating costs down to Ethereum. And so the marginal cost to scale and add users is essentially zero. Yeah. And when you have essentially that zero cost to add and scale users, and then users are earning the revenues through trading fees and transaction fees, you get this explosion of innovation. And so I think just looking at some of the numbers, Uniswap just yesterday did $5.6 million in transaction fees. Again, those are fees that are earned by the users of that network. So it's really a different model, more of a positive sum game that we're seeing in this Web 3.0 framework.
Absolutely. I think the Uniswap DAO has now passed over $3 billion. I think they're probably one of almost the same amount of funding as some smaller minority countries in terms of what they could go out and spend. It's quite incredible how quickly that's kind of innovated. And
can I pick up on the feedback loops Michael mentioned, because I see this in my industry, education, and I think Greg Eisenberg talked about how NFTs will shake up education, because suddenly you have shared ownership. So he apparently created a crypto college NFT DAO at his institution, and then the Discord channel took off, but everything had ownership, and they wanted, because they now had a stake in it, for it to succeed. And I think these kinds of flywheels and feedback loops they're driving adoption without, as you said, any marketing budget.
Right. Yes, and just to pick up on that, Ryan. So I think we're seeing this explosion of growth, but it's really happening. We don't have the compliance, we don't have the regulation in place right now, and it's sort of a bit of a Wild West type atmosphere. I think what will get us to that next level, where we're starting to see institutions come into play. Some of the larger, there's companies like Fireblocks that have really kind of exploded and are trying to offer more institutional type access to some of these protocols at the DeFi layer. But I think what I'm really looking to see, and I know a lot of entrepreneurs are out there working on, is identity. And that's, to me, the regulation will come after we establish the ability to tie like a real world entity of identity to a blockchain address. And once we can do that, and we can identify who's behind these smart contracts, what are the audits that they've gone through, what are the standards that have been established around that, and then who's on the other side of that transaction, so that institutions can understand who they're dealing with. That to me is the key piece, is identity, and then regulation will come after.
Interesting. Can I respond to that, Ryan?
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
So Michael, you're saying that sort of what would be driving further adoption is if we had a clearer link between a crypto identity and a real world persona, right? And I think historically, if you look back, at successful business models, which is sort of my area of expertise, that has been absolutely true for Web 2. So the predecessors of Facebook that just created, like MySpace and how they were called, they didn't have real people, right? There was no link between my personality my persona on the space and the real world, or the efforts back then trying to come up with new currencies failed, and it was PayPal linking real people and real currencies, but offering a digital channel. So historically, that has been the success formula for digital companies in Web 2 to take off. I'm not sure I have an opinion even on whether that's going to be the case in Web 3, because I mean the whole point is to be non-identifiable, right? So I'm even puzzled that people are now picking up these ENS domains and, putting their ETH address, because everyone can look it up, basically. I can look up which scam did you buy, what, NFTs do you own. So I think it's a key point how this will develop, and certainly states would want that. But wouldn't it be the development also with the metaverse that we don't go online as the real people, but we create personas? I also perceive that is a trend, that people, the crypto people, they are not on Twitter with their real name. They create a virtual persona that makes the money and that represents them.
I think it's a fantastic point, because it almost feels like we might see these kind of two tracks evolve in parallel, where the nature of an open wallet means that everything is transparent, and you can see all of the relationships between those wallets. Anything that's happened on chain, you can see, and then kind of trying to tie that, as you say, to this more this drive towards anonymity and being able to take control of your data after we've kind of become the product, from various different sort of marketplaces, like the Amazons, the Facebook, these worlds where they provide you free services, but obviously are harvesting incredible data points and, perhaps pushing you into certain decisions that might not normally do so. And I think there's more of an awareness over the last few years on both of those sides. So it brings me quite well into the next sort of point within this. So, do we see DeFi and CeFi actually integrating together? Do we see these kind of things combining, or are they going to be built in separate silos? And will there be certain focuses on one rather than the other? Perhaps I can push that across to you, Michael. I think you're quite clear that it's going one way, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and we'll see how this starts to shake out. I think we're seeing some signals of kind of how things are starting to play out. If you look at what's been happening with the rise of just fintechs and neobanks and some of these, a platform like Robinhood, for example, that is, we could call them CeFi, but they are really kind of at the cutting edge of some of this innovation in traditional finance. And so, I think what we'll start to see here is a little bit of collaboration between these fintechs and some of the interesting innovation in traditional finance, leveraging DeFi in the background, right? So you have something like Robinhood that is offering that really clean user interface, that easy onboard, the nice ability to transact for their customers, but they're leveraging something like Uniswap underneath to get some more liquidity. And that's really where we have to solve some of the KYC, AML at that top layer for Robinhood to be able to kind of access some of those DeFi protocols. But I think that's what we'll start to see is a little bit where, and I think banks will have to sort of pivot a little bit to where their customers are going, and the reason Robinhood's moving in that direction is because all of their growth is coming from crypto. And so the customers at the end of the day are driving a lot of these efforts. And I think the incumbents in the banking sector will have to adapt to what the customer needs are.
I think that's a great point. So just breaking that down a little bit, is the problem with KYC that just this explosion of kind of like cross-border transactions doesn't really fit into the existing KYC model, right? Because you kind of have, and I think it's always worth mentioning that KYC it's a spectrum. KYC from your bank where you've set up a savings account when you're 12 years old because you've never changed it over till you're 40 years old is very different to showing a driving license to a KYC platform and saying, hey, this is me and this is my wallet. This is a very different level of understanding. Is this where that kind of issue lies in terms of that cross jurisdiction KYC, and also the level of KYC, as it were, in terms of who should be able to have an international identifier?
Yeah, I think that's you're kind of hitting on it there. I think Robinhood is trying to leverage some of these protocols, but they need to be comfortable with who's on the other side of that transaction. If you have people that are in Uniswap, anybody can be a market maker in Uniswap, right? So people are adding liquidity to the pools, and that can't be, Robinhood can't allow someone to be adding liquidity to pools if they're on a sanction list somewhere and they haven't gone through KYC, or there's money laundering or tax avoidance. So I think there needs to be some sort of middleware solution that sits between Robinhood at that top interface layer and where DeFi sits, where we can do identity. We can understand who's the counterparty on the other side of a lot of these transactions. So I know this is being worked on. I know it's a demand. It's coming from customer demand, and it's just going to take some time to kind of get there. But it seems like this is the direction things are going.
Very good. And one thing that we sometimes forget to mention when we talk about DeFi and the amount of usage is the actual number of users who are starting to interact with these protocols. So, Dr. Welpe, maybe you'd like to sort of go into that a little bit more? I mean, if we look at the numbers, if we, let's say, compare this to Web 2.0, we're probably, as you say, back in 1998. I think there's 150 million, 170 million wallets, but the number of those which have actually interacted with a smart contract, I think, is even single figures in terms of the millions, which kind of suggests that it's still a bit of a private boys club, and there's still a lot of education which is needed for people to become more confident to access. How do you see that sort of playing out from an infrastructure standpoint for that next wave of adoption?
Are you asking me or Michael?
Yes, I am. Yes, sorry.
Okay, so I concur with what Michael said. So I mean, DeFi applications, they compete for the same funds as traditional finance firms, and I think it's actually the savers and lenders, the mainstream savers and lenders, that will decide about the long-term future of DeFi. And we will have to see a distribution within the crypto space. So crypto assets redistributed from wallets to DeFi protocols. And I don't have the actual numbers right now, but the major question is, will disintermediation of traditional finance and will happen, and will borrowers and savers relocate funds not just towards firms like Coinbase, but to actual decentralized exchanges and protocols. I don't know if you have the numbers, Michael, on how many already have done so, but I think the number is far greater to have it somewhere in custody, whether it's the traditional banks or the Coinbase types.
Yeah. So in terms of like the users, I think your numbers are pretty kind of what I'm looking at, Ryan, in terms of the broad ecosystem. We're seeing explosive growth in the DeFi sector. Like I said, it can happen pretty quick just because the ability to onboard users and the marginal cost to do so is very low. But I think at the end of the day, it is to get this into a broad adoption, you are going to have to get institutions into the game, and I think we sort of mentioned this earlier, but I do see sort of potentially having sort of divergence there, where retail potentially can still access Uniswap from directly at uniswap.org, but an institution will want to go through a institutional custody provider that's providing that kind of base layer, that interface layer with compliance, KYC, AML, and they understand who they're dealing with on the other side of it. So I think that's really the key to see that explosive growth, and that may take a few years to get to that piece.
Good. So one area that I think we haven't quite covered yet, and sometimes it is the elephant in the room, and it's something that more institutional clients in their more traditional businesses probably don't have to worry about so much. But considering the last couple of weeks, we've had a couple of major hacks across certain smart contract platforms, and so on. So I think we had Badger DAO. There was $165 million loss within that kind of hack with their various bridges. A potential lender who was lending institutionally, but potentially lost a very sizable amount of Bitcoin within that hack. How can consumers and institutions get more comfortable? Because obviously we're still gaining a humongous momentum of not only DeFi across different chains, which we've seen in the last 6 months at significant volumes, but across new protocols and new instruments as well. Is there anything more we can be doing there to sort of help accredit and ensure that we are, getting volumes into more trustworthy players within the industry? Do you find there's an issue there? I'll put that to you, Michael.
Sure. No, it's a great question, and it's sort of, that's something that large institutions, they just can't. You can't go to your clients and say, "Oh, the smart contract was hacked and we lost $50 million." So that's just kind of a barrier to entry right there. And I think the challenge here is getting clarity behind who is creating the smart contract, right? If a large institution is going to interact with DeFi, they need to know who created that smart contract, who audited that smart contract, what were the standards that were created around how that smart contract is operated. We don't have any of these frameworks in place today, but that is really what it would take to get comfort from an institutional player. I mean, right now, it's sort of, if you're dealing with DeFi and some of these smart contracts, you're crossing your fingers and hoping that these are not hackable smart contracts. So, I will just mention the smart contracts themselves we've seen some hacks there that is different from like the blockchain ledger itself being hacked, which that has been shown security over the long run. But I think that's just it. And that's kind of where I think identity comes into play, not just from the user perspective of identifying yourself with KYC, AML, and maybe allowing for permissioned access to your personal data to get access, but then also identity on the other side of the equation there, where the developers of the protocol are identifying who they are. They're opening up their smart contracts to audits and various attestations to get all players comfortable. So
this is a really good area, and maybe I'll push this one back over to you, Dr. Welpe. If you look across the ecosystem with some of these layer one development teams and protocol development teams, it's clear that some of the most prominent developers are anonymous within this space. So some of those who are, the white hats, the guys who are able to find, a number of these issues, report them, ensure funds are being returned, have not disclosed names and are not known outside of obviously that small group of developers who probably have had a beer with them and know what they look like. Is this an issue, or is this something which is actually quite perhaps something we should look at a bit differently in terms of identity?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe they're anonymous with regard to their real birth certificate names, but it doesn't mean that they're anonymous in the space, because certainly you can build a reputation and a predictability score for your persona that you represent. I mean, it's kind of, the whole space was born this way. I mean, we still don't know to date who was Satoshi Nakamoto. And so I think the point Michael raised is going to be a really interesting, decisive one. Will we actually see the real identities linked to wallets and to developers, or will there be another space where people remain their maybe anonymity or pseudonymity? I think that's one of the most interesting features of Web3 is that it sort of allows best of both worlds. It allows for personalized, individualized solutions. And at the same time, it doesn't require what KYC forces me to do, a photo of my personal identity card that also has my height, where I live, and that information really, I don't want it to be with a bank really. They should just check, am I allowed to buy alcohol? Am I allowed to do business in this country? Things like that. So maybe there's going to be a third way, like pseudonymity, where people don't give their whole data away, but where there's some kind of verification. It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, with the metaverse, certainly. Can you imagine the metaverse, us all being there with our real names? Somehow the experiences I've had, I find this hard to imagine.
I guess what you want to get up to the metaverse, but
So on that point, and kind of, I think the direction, I think you're right. I think there is this desire for pseudonymity and different personas, and I think the key here is, and we're moving into a Web3 world where we want users to be able to control their data and allow for permissioned access to data, and not just centralized authorities being able to use our data, sell our data. So what I'm seeing in the space is some protocols being built where, you know, a user could essentially opt into identifying themselves and their wallet address, but controlling who gets to see it, right?
Yeah,
so you could still be using an avatar as your photo. You could still have that kind of persona in the Web3 metaverse. But if you wanted to access some sort of party and you had to be 21 to do so, you could show that you're 21, and that's tied to your social security number to get in there. You know, so like I think that's potentially the direction this starts to go as well.
Yeah. I just, you know, in the last days, it was just a feeling I had talking to students of mine and, you know, and all of this. And I felt like, oh my God, this is so, you know, corporate and old to be online with your real name on Twitter like I am. I have to start and build a persona and have an avatar. And because my sense that I was getting from the, you know, the young students at my universities, that's what they're doing. And so I thought it was very interesting what you said. It gave me some hope, Michael, that maybe we're all going back to being identified, but I'm not 100% certain that will happen.
So which crypto animal are you leaning towards, Doctor? Do you have a preference?
Oh, you know what I've done, I can recommend to anyone. I have a digital mentor, which is one of my students, and who forced me to participate in some NFT auction at midnight. And I think for 250 euros, I bought you know, an avatar. If you told me I would be doing that a year ago, I would not have believed it.
Maybe this time next year you will have that avatar.
Exactly. You won't see me here. You know, it'll be the avatar speaking. Exactly. Yeah.
Wonderful. I know we're coming to sort of the close of this panel. I really thank you so much for taking the time out. I know you're incredibly busy. Maybe just as closing thoughts, just get a little bit of insight in terms of what you're seeing. And perhaps I'll put this to you first, Doctor. So, you know, is there maybe one element which you think can allow us to make that, you know, that next big move within DeFi to grow the number of users, to allow more people to come in? Is there one potentially thing that you think is going to be most instrumental to that, you know, next 10x growth that we might see?
I mean, something I'm going to talk about later, obviously, you know, financial inclusion, because so many people, if you look globally, we haven't reached with Web 2 and traditional banking. So if there was a way to onboard them, that would certainly drive growth quite significantly.
Fantastic. And Michael, I know I've put you on the spot, but is there any one factor that you can see being that real catalytic effect for the next 10x growth?
Yeah, I think education is just so incredibly important. But these markets, these technologies, we're still in such a nascent phase here. And I think educating regulators to the benefits of what these technologies are providing in terms of just the different kind of framework of a network that's owned and kind of governed by the users themselves, and they all get to participate in the economics of that. I think is potentially just opening up the potential for capitalism just across a wider swath of the economy. And I think just educating, we still have 2 billion folks that are unbanked, you know, throughout the world. And so if we can somehow leverage this technology to provide access to everybody, we should be doing that. So I think it's education, and then hopefully with the education, with regulation, everyone will start to move and coalesce around the idea that this is positive for society.
And picking up on that, education can also, of course, happen at universities, but it often happens through peers and through media. So there have been some fascinating studies that have followed real life people and how their life has changed. In Brazil, for example, once they got access to cable networks and watched telenovelas, so almost immediately, you know, their own life and professional choices started to mirror those portrayed on TV. So one major thing, Ryan, to force adoption is if it became a thing that people see on their favorite TV shows, their favorite actors. They just mention this. I'm with Uniswap, or today I joined a DAO, and I'm doing this NFT auction next week. I think that probably, if we could, maybe we need to have a conference where we invite the directors, and educate them first, and the script writers, and then that'll take off.
I would love that, just because my mother has started working startup where I think in the first season it's about this shadowy blockchain coin that is basically
something like that,
allowing the Miami drug network to be anonymized. And,
I'm quite serious about that, because that's what drives social change. It's not so much research and science what we do, and it's not so much legislation and what politicians say. It really is popular culture and the media. And if you talk to people in this industry, I think they're quite open to making their scripts more interesting, because it's very mainstream, always the same setup. So I would encourage, some cross-industry meeting where we could have a Netflix documentary on exactly these topics. Probably that would be one of the biggest impact factors.
Love that idea.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that would be a fantastic movement. So if there's any aspiring film directors who join us today, please do run with that. That would be great. So I will close it there, because I know we're running out a little bit of time, but thank you so much for joining us. It's a pretty insightful panel. Again, I'm sure we'll share contact details, so if anyone has any follow-up questions, I'm sure they will reach out. So thank you so much.